FTC. I'm here sitting down with Josh Mandel, who's running for the Republican. He's running for the Senate in the Republican race in the state of Ohio. He's in the primaries right now. The GOP race seems to be pretty hot, and Josh is a fan of Bitcoin, and so we're here to talk about everything that's going on in Ohio, Bitcoin, and the state of this country. Particularly, Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. No, I think I'm excited for this conversation. I've had a few people who are Cynthia Lummis has been on the show. She was not senator yet when we recorded. Blake Masters has been on the show as well. He's running in Arizona, and now you are the third politician we've had on the show to talk about Bitcoin. And it seems like Bitcoin is becoming a very hot topic in the political sphere. And I'm just here to understand your perspective, why you believe Bitcoin's important and why you've made it a point to thread Bitcoin throughout your campaign, which many would view as risky in some regards.
Sure. Yeah, I'm running on a pro Bitcoin platform. It's definitely made me a lot of enemies, but I wear those enemies as a badge of honor. I've had Paul Krugman coming after me left and right, and a bunch of other just Luddites and dinosaurs in politics and in the media. If you want to give you sort of a background of how I became a enthusiast and a Bitcoin maximalist, I was state treasurer of Ohio, and I had this crazy idea to put the state of Ohio's checkbook online. As transparency, I said the taxpayers have a right to know how the tax money is being spent. And I put online over $690 billion of state spending, everything from $2 for a pack of pencils to millions of dollars for road contracts and everything in between. Managed to basically piss off every politician in the state. The politicians hated it, but the taxpayers loved it. And through that process of putting the state's checkbook online, I got to know a lot of people in the liberty movement, in the libertarian community around the country, and also in the technology community. And at that time, when I put the state's checkbook online and created this ohiocheckbook.com, a lot of the friends I made, in the libertarian community and tech community, they kept talking about Bitcoin. This was probably around 2014. And so I've always been a strong believer in individual liberty and personal freedom. And it was my beliefs in those two principles that, really brought me into the community and had me at the beginning of just studying Bitcoin and the democratization of money in general. So a little later in my term as state treasurer, I decided that I wanted to make Ohio the first state in America to allow taxpayers to pay taxes with Bitcoin. At the time, it would have been a crazy idea in Ohio, and I don't think any state in America had done it either. I mean, now I think it's more accepted, and a lot of states are doing that. And so I went to my senior staff and I said, "Listen, I'm not asking you. I'm telling you, we're going to make Ohio the first state in America to allow taxpayers to pay taxes with Bitcoin." I said, "You have 24 hours to either walk out of this room or come back to me and give me ideas of how we can do it, and also all the arguments that are going to be made against us." So I come back a day later. No one had walked out of the room, which was fortunate. And they came to me and said, "Listen, here's the bottom line. The bad news is there's nowhere in state law or federal law that enables you to allow taxpayers to pay taxes with Bitcoin. The good news is there's nowhere in state law or federal law that prohibits you from doing it either." And I said, "All right, let's just do it. I believe that we're on the side of personal freedom, individual liberty. We're on the side of the law. We're on the side of the taxpayers. We're on the side of the angels. Let's just do it, and we can ask for forgiveness later." And so we did it. I created a website called ohiocrypto.com, made Ohio the first state in America to pay taxes, to allow taxpayers to pay taxes with Bitcoin. The governor went bananas. It was Governor Kasich at the time. The Attorney General, Mike DeWine, who's now the governor, was none too happy. The legislature didn't know what was going on. And we just did it. And we kicked that door open. And we made Ohio the first state in America to do it. And I didn't plan it this way because it took us a long time to build the website, but it so happened that I ended up launching ohiocrypto.com at the exact time when, Bitcoin was in a bear market. It was probably around November, December of 2018. So if
Hmm.
you remember, it was a time when like Jay Clayton and Jamie Dimon and all these dinosaurs were stomping on Bitcoin and stomping on our community. And so at a time when these big bank CEOs and big government dinosaurs who are anti-Bitcoin were stomping on Bitcoin, here comes the state treasurer from the seventh largest state in the nation and says we are recognizing Bitcoin as a form of tax payments for our state. And so it totally cut against what Jamie Dimon and all these other anti Bitcoin folks were trying to say and do. And I went to a conference in New York and spoke to a lot of people there, and sort of got known in the community. And I left public office by term limits. And about a year ago, a guy named Rob Portman here in Ohio decided that he was not going to run again. And so I announced I'm going to run for the U.S. Senate. I'm the leading candidate, and I'm also the only pro Bitcoin candidate in the race.
That's a hell of a resume there from a Bitcoin perspective. Getting Bitcoin accepted, allowing taxpayers to pay their taxes in Bitcoin is a great endorsement. What I want to see, this is just a Bitcoiner, what I've been pushing. So I'm in the Bitcoin mining industry. And I think what we need to do is replicate what Alaska's done with their oil permanent fund, but do it with Bitcoin mining. So Ohio is a very natural gas rich state. You guys got that Gucci gas. And what I want to see, and I think Wyoming's very well positioned to do this as well, is you can maybe issue bonds at the state level to get money to invest in mining infrastructure that then gets rolled into a permanent fund that allows you to prevent taxpayers from having to part ways with their Bitcoin by paying taxes, because you can use this permanent fund to fund state activities. Now, I'm an idiot. I do not really get involved with the political sphere too much. Is this something that you think could be possible? It's like, could Ohio create like a mining permanent fund potentially?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. I mean, listen, I used to be in that office. I was the state treasurer. I was elected by the people of Ohio. And you mentioned the gas here. A lot of people don't realize if you took Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia and combined our three states into a region, that region will be the third largest producer of natural gas in the entire world.
Yeah.
We are literally sitting on a gold mine of natural gas. And as in West Texas and other parts of America, there's such an abundance of natural gas that it's being flared. And imagine if that natural gas could be captured and used for Bitcoin mining. What a great thing for our people! What a great thing for our country!
Yeah, well, and this just gets into energy policy in general. Like, there seems to be at the federal government level right now a inability, or an unwillingness is a better word, an unwillingness to tap into these natural resources we have. It seems like from an energy policy perspective, we're taking many steps back because there's many virtue signaling environmentalists who think they're doing good for the country and the world by transitioning to unreliable renewables like solar and wind, and they're unwilling to make America energy independent by tapping into the bountiful resources that we have in the form of natural gas, oil, coal, nuclear. Obviously, there's not much uranium on U.S. soil, but we do have people who are smart enough to spin up reactors that could leverage nuclear energy. But we seem to be at this weird point in U.S. history where there's again an unwillingness to leverage our natural resources to become energy independent, economically independent, and increase the quality of life for individuals across the country.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, these natural resources we have beneath our feet, these are assets, not liabilities. We are blessed to have here in Ohio this abundance of natural gas in the Marcellus and the Utica Shale. And, we're blessed to have these natural resources throughout the country in so many American states. And, I reject the false choice that a lot of the like radical environmentalists try to present. They say, well, either you can drill for oil and gas and mine coal, or you could be pro-environment. That's baloney. We can do both. They're not mutually exclusive. We can protect the air we breathe, the water we drink, the environment for our kids and grandkids. And at the same time, we can explore for natural resources and develop natural resources here in this country. And we should be doing that, for three reasons. One, for the economic strength of our nation. When we produce energy here, it not only brings down the cost of Bitcoin mining, but it brings down the cost of heating someone's home. Here in Cleveland, where I'm coming at you, I think it was 14 degrees over the weekend, and it's expensive for middle class families and individuals on fixed incomes to heat their home. Well, let's bring down the cost with American natural resources. How about powering factories? If we can power factories with more reliable, dependable, affordable energy that comes from America, it means you could hire more people. The people already have jobs in factories, have higher wages. Obviously we can bring down the cost at the pumps. And, I think the, Biden administration's decision to shut down the Keystone XL pipeline. They're trying to shut down the pipeline from Alberta, Canada into Michigan.
Was that Pipeline 5?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing everything they can to block natural gas development here in Ohio and Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and other parts of the country. But then, Biden lifts sanctions on Russia and enables the pipeline to Russia. And then he says to the American people, why don't we depend on OPEC? It's like, wait a second, OPEC? I mean, these are radical Islamic regimes in the Middle East who'd love to wipe America off the map. Why don't we, instead of depending on Saudi Arabia, why don't we depend on Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma? The list goes on and on and on. And so, this is center to Bitcoin, but it's also center to a strong America. And I think, strong Bitcoin and strong America are one and the same.
I do as well, right? Because Bitcoin, you leaned into it a little bit in the beginning of our conversation, but it is the protocol itself being open, transparent, very focused on protecting private property rights in the form of private public key cryptography. It aligns very tightly with the ideals that this country was founded on. Private property rights, sound money, and individuals being able to protect themselves.
Absolutely. If I can, just make one other just observation. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on energy here, but when wells are capped,
mm-hmm.
There can be, there can be methane release. Well, imagine if that methane release, instead of capping, it was actually captured, for Bitcoin development and Bitcoin mining. I mean, Elizabeth Warren makes this ridiculous argument that Bitcoin is somehow bad for the environment. It's actually the opposite. Bitcoin mining is good for the environment. And, we're going to talk about this hopefully in the course of our conversation, but I do not think that the advancement of Bitcoin is a partisan issue. In fact, it only works if we as a community are relentlessly bipartisan and relentlessly one issue. And, to be successful politically in Washington or in state capitals, the Bitcoin community needs to be relentlessly bipartisan and relentlessly one issue and just focus. And, it's something I feel very strongly about. And, right now we have a one senator Bitcoin caucus in the United States Senate with Cynthia Lummis out of Wyoming. I've loved some of the recent stuff that Ted Cruz has been saying. And I'm running on a pro-Bitcoin platform to really go grow the Bitcoin caucus in the United States Senate. And my vision for it is that it's full of Republicans and Democrats. And if you got some folks who end up being there who are libertarian, Green Party, vegetarian, whatever, we'll take them, if they're pro-Bitcoin.
Right. No, that's the beauty of Bitcoin. It does not need partisan politics to succeed. And like you mentioned, it probably will be even stronger if many people realize this is a bipartisan issue. Sound money and transparency is something that are desperately needed at this point in U.S. history. I mean, just right before we came on to record this, I retweeted a video that's been circulating this morning. Jon Stewart had on the president of the Kansas City Fed, I believe. I forget his name off the top of my head, but Jon Stewart's asking him, what is backing the dollar? How does the dollar operate? And he openly admits, it's full faith that the Federal Reserve and the Board of Governors can actually maintain and sort of steward the dollar. It is debt based. You're banking on future production to make sure that this can subsist. But like John Stewart, pretty notable liberal in the political sphere, specifically as a commentator. In that, like most people don't even understand how the dollar works, and that it is not backed by anything, and it is all faith based. And he had, it seemed like an epiphany during that conversation in the small clip that was shared, that like I didn't understand this, and I think that's what most people, Republican or Democrat, don't understand how the dollar works and how detrimental it is to the ability to save, which is detrimental to society because you can't plan for the future.
Listen, we have one of the 12 Federal Reserve banks here in Cleveland, and here's how I feel about it. I actually think we should end the Federal Reserve. Um, there's a like binary choice. It's sort of like a fork in the roads,
Mm-hmm.
and like we either, as American citizens, we either live in one of 12 Federal Reserve districts, or we live free. Both of those cannot be true. And we need United States senators who get that.
We do. I mean, I agree. I think we have a binary choice too. Like I would even describe it probably more, be more aggressive with the description, just like we either get the Chinese social credit scoring surveillance system exported here to the U.S., which the Federal Reserve, the ECB, central banks around the world want to do with their central bank digital currencies. That's what will happen. You'll have that social credit scoring system enacted via that CBDC, or we get a future built on freedom and transparency, which Bitcoin provides. It's scary.
Exactly. I've posted on it, on my Twitter, Josh Mandel, Ohio, that not only should we end the Federal Reserve, but we have to crush this, Federal Reserve. I think they're taking comment questions now about a CBDC, here. I mean, it's horrible for America. It's horrible for individual citizens. It's horrible for human liberty. It's horrible for personal freedom. It's just bad in general. And if they're still having that conversation when I'm sworn into the U.S. Senate a year from now, I will do everything I can to crush it. And, I get asked a lot, about things I'll do in the United States Senate that are, pro Bitcoin. One of the most important things, I believe, one of the most important roles of a United States Senator is the role of advising consent, and the role a United States Senator takes in really grilling and vetting nominees to not only the federal bench, but to all these different agencies. And when you look at the Federal Reserve or you look at the SEC and some of these others, I am going to make sure that every single person that is nominated, whether it's a Democrat president or Republican president, they are grilled and vetted on their positions on Bitcoin. And if they don't have an understanding, I will tell them to go study and come back, and then I will grill them again. But I don't know is not going to be a sufficient answer for me. And I will do everything I can to block and crush nominees. I don't care if it comes from a Democrat president or Republican president. If they're anti-Bitcoin, I will do everything I can to stop and crush their nomination.
Mm-hmm. That actually leads me to an interesting question. From like your perspective, if let's just say hypothetically Bitcoin is either banned or prevented from flourishing in the United States, what do you think that means for the future of the U.S.? Like how does shutting down Bitcoin, attempting to shut down Bitcoin, I don't think you can shut it down, but you can certainly slow down individual U.S. citizens from adopting it and using it in an efficient manner. Like what happens to the U.S. if we mess up policy around Bitcoin?
It crushes liberty at a human personal level, and it crushes freedom for individuals and for families. And listen, for anyone listening to this, if you distrust government, if you are skeptical about politicians, if you are cynical about how the political process works, then you should be for Bitcoin. And again, it doesn't matter what political party you come from. It doesn't matter what race, religion, socioeconomic background you come from. If you have a distrust of government, if you have a distrust of politicians, you should be for Bitcoin. And so the counter to that, or the inverse to that, going back to your question, is, what does weakening or trying to stop Bitcoin do? It empowers those politicians and those bureaucrats who want to control our lives. And like you said, whether it's to get, social credit scoring, like the Chinese Communist Party is trying to advance, not just in China, but eventually throughout the world, or it's some other type of authoritarianism. Like anyone who's an authoritarian, into authoritarianism, anyone who is a big government, control the people, someone who wants people to be as weak as possible and government to be as powerful as possible, it is those politicians and those bureaucrats who will flourish and advance their goals, if Bitcoin is weak or stopped. And so that's why I feel so strongly about supporting Bitcoin, our movement, our community, because we need to do everything we can to eradicate from our government and our political offices politicians and bureaucrats who want to control the people.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You're preaching to the choir. I probably fall into the former bucket of people you described. I'm personally politically disenfranchised. I've been a big believer for quite a while, having been a child of the aftermath of 9/11 and the great financial crisis, that politics, unfortunately, throughout the course of my life has never ended in good results for my generation or people in the U.S. And Bitcoin, to me, presents an opportunity to sort of build something outside the system without having to wait for that political system to bring about the world that I would like to see. Bitcoin provides me with that opportunity. That's why I like leaning into it. That's why I like having the show. But with that being said, like, it is really nice to see a Bitcoin caucus developing among senators and representatives at the federal level, because I think, again, like, I do love the ideal. I do love this country, right? Like, I think that's what many people, when you talk to somebody like myself, is politically disenfranchised. I just think you're like anti-America or whatever. It's like, no, like, I'm anti-big government, and I do, and I don't even like to describe myself as like a Republican or a right-leaning person, even though that's probably how people would describe me. It's just like, I believe that systems like economies and monetary systems are complex systems, and just applying a heuristic to the understanding of complex systems, like you're never going to get good results from top-down control or attempts at top-down control of complex systems. And I think over the last 3 decades of my life, that's exactly what the government has done, is tried to control very complex systems, whether it be centuries worth of political stability built up in the Middle East, whether it be via the monetary system or the global economy, as we've witnessed for the last 2 years with the economic shutdowns and the lockdowns.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm glad to hear you say that. So, I think we're a similar generation, and I get these anti-Bitcoiners who, they come at me and say, "Oh, Josh, by you saying you want to end the Federal Reserve, or by you being, pro Bitcoin, somehow you're like not patriotic." It's like, wait a second. I'm a Marine Corps vet. I did 2 tours in Anbar Province, Iraq. I did my small part. I, put my life on the line. And the reason, like, I do support Bitcoin is because I believe in the Constitution that I swore an oath to defend. Because the foundation of that Constitution is human liberty and personal freedom. It's not big government. The framers of the Constitution, the founders of this nation, they distrusted government. Like, that is like the foundation of our American system, of this republic, is making people as big as possible and making government as small as possible and as limited in size and scope. And so, it's interesting. Like, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, a decade ago, you had a lot of folks who were just like totally dismissing Bitcoin. And then, like, maybe, 7, 8 years ago, you had like a lot of folks I'd say were um, tech specialists and at the pointy tip of the spear in the technology world who were embracing it, but it definitely, was not mainstream. And then maybe, like, 5, 6 years ago, it was more and more mainstream for the investment community and just others. And then now today, it's actually being talked about as a form of national security for America. So think about that. Think about that progress. And it's really amazing in such a short period of time where we've come. And it's exciting to think where we're going, because make no mistake about it, the Chinese Communist Party, they wake up every morning thinking about world dominance. Like, that is what they think about. Let me read you this. A buddy of mine. Let me just read this real quick, because a buddy of mine texted me. So last July, let me see if I can pull this up. Last July, Xi in China gives this speech to the Chinese Communist Party. And I'm just going to read one line from his speech. But this line from his speech, it was directed at us as Americans. So here's what he says. It says, Xi lauded the accomplishments of his country of 1.4 billion people and portrayed the 95 million member Chinese Communist Party as the only entity that can complete the task of national rejuvenation, warning that any force, and he's talking to America, warning that any force that attempts to bully, oppress, or subjugate us will find itself on a collision course with a great wall of steel. That was Xi last July. And these guys don't mince words. And, we've got, Marty, we got politicians in this country on both sides, Democrat and Republican. They're thinking in terms of 24-hour news cycles and 2-year, 4-year, 6-year election cycles. The Chinese Communist Party, these guys are thinking in terms of decades, generations, centuries. And, and I know you followed, and a lot of your listeners followed what they're doing with, debt trap, diplomacy, and, a lot of what, their activities, throughout Africa, Central America, South America. And, I think our politicians need to wake up. And, the fact that the Federal Reserve here is talking about a CBDC is just, it's nutso to me. And we're going to stop it. But, one of the tools we have in our tool belt to combat the Chinese Communist Party quest for dominance is Bitcoin. And listen, I'm a Marine Corps vet who's against the Patriot Act. I worked in the intelligence community. I'm against the Patriot Act. And I'm for Bitcoin. And I think you'll find, a lot of men and women, our generation, who served in Iraq or served in Afghanistan, are increasingly anti-Patriot Act and pro-Bitcoin. And it's because we put our lives on the line to defend this country. And, we know what this country's all about. It's all about advancing the cause of human liberty and personal freedom. It's not about government control of our lives. And the Chinese Communist Party, that is all they're about, is the government control of people's lives.
Yeah, they're playing to win. They don't mess around. And that's, we covered it on this show when it first came to light in the summer of 2020. But they infiltrated the university system. You had a bunch of researchers throughout the United States and the university system, reporting back to the CCP, and that sort of got glossed over. You had that one Harvard professor, actually, I believe the Department of Justice and the FBI wound up arresting him, and he got sent to jail for sending medical information or research back to the CCP, and I think it was directly related to the coronavirus stuff. It's and that's, if I understand it correctly, China doesn't only play for keeps, they only play long-term games, but they do war in a different way, where it's more covert and behind the scenes. And one could argue that we're under attack in many regards here in the United States, and it seems like people are asleep at the wheel, not understanding this, and then it seems like some people do understand, but it doesn't seem like we're doing much to combat it. And like you said, I think Bitcoin is a potent tool to ensure that China doesn't win this long game that we're playing. And again, I know many Chinese citizens are good people. Some of the best, most insightful, capitalistic people in the Bitcoin industry, the mining industry specifically, are from China, but they're Chinese citizens. They're not like members of the CCP, if you will. And it's just trying to, like, and that's another thing Bitcoin can do. Like if the United States leans into it and strengthens the Bitcoin network, that can strengthen individual Chinese citizens who then have more leverage against the oppressive CCP in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about what the CCP does quietly. Where I live here in the Cleveland area, right down the road from where I'm sitting is Case Western Reserve University. It's one of the one of the top engineering, hard sciences, colleges in America. The Chinese Communist Party, they have kids that are enrolled there at Case Western Reserve University, and I'm sure they have them enrolled where you're sitting in Austin at University of Texas and other universities. We know they do it at MIT, and we know they do it at Polytech here, and we know they do it at Purdue and Georgia Tech and all over the country. They go up to kids who are in high school in China, and they say, "Hey, we're going to pay and enroll you for college in America, and you're going to be a spy for the CCP." And these high school kids in China say to the government, "No, I don't want to do that. I'm going to stay in China." And the CCP says to them, "No, I don't think you understand. We are going to send you to America. We're going to enroll you in XYZ University. You are going to be a spy for the Chinese Communist Party. And if you do not agree to do this, we will disappear your family. So those are your choices." And so they have kids enrolled at American universities in every state in this nation who are spies. They're there for one reason: to collect information and intelligence for the Chinese Communist Party. That is the game they're playing. That is the war they are waging. And we need policy leaders that are willing to wake up to it. Now, just to say something else here, you were talking about just politically, what happens. I think we got in this China topic talking about just the politics in this country. If the anti-Bitcoin folks in DC succeed, let me tell you who's funding the anti-Bitcoin folks. It's people like Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan and big banks like that. A buddy of mine recently told me that, I guess following flight logs and whatnot, that Jamie Dimon spent approximately 4 months of one of the previous years in Washington, or at least, on approximately 4 months of the year was in DC. Mm-hmm. Think about that for a second. He's trying to, build his own competing network, to try to crush the Lightning Network. And like this is an American company, but it's not a company that's advancing the cause of American strength. If any company that's trying to stop Bitcoin, it's not trying to strengthen America. And so, yeah, we should have our eyes on people like Jamie Dimon and companies like JP Morgan and others, because they're trying to do everything they can to stop Bitcoin, which means stopping human liberty and stopping personal freedom and weakening America.
Yeah, no, in a big way in which Jamie Dimon does it. I imagine he was spending 4 months of an individual year in D.C. to lobby for particular regulations to either stay in place or be added, because that's what these large behemoths from the banking sector do very well, is they lobby to create a regulatory environment that creates a competitive moat that does not enable upstarts to actually compete with them. They don't like competition, and they fight to make it so competition is just immediately dismayed from the prospect of even trying to compete, because the cost of compliance is so high. And that's one thing we focus on here at TFTC quite a bit, is KYC AML regulation stemming from the Bank Secrecy Act. I personally think the Bank Secrecy Act should be abolished. I don't think KYC AML regulation that a lot of these banks use to create their regulatory moats actually helps any individuals. So criminals are going to criminal. They're going to figure out how to they're going to figure out how to launder money, and they're going to use the KYC AML data that they hack from these servers that are holding that data on behalf of these banking institutions. Not even banking institutions anymore. It's spread to many other types of institutions, and it just puts individuals in harm's way. You increase the cost of compliance by forcing companies to collect and store data, which is burdensome from an expense standpoint, and then on those servers often get hacked, and we see it in the Bitcoin world a lot with sim swapping. Like, people are able to take information from those hacks, get the phone number, swap the SIM card, get the email address, reset the password, and steal people's Bitcoin. This is just mainly because people are forced to give up all their personal identifying information in the name of protecting people from money laundering.
Yeah, I mean, so many of these regulations and laws they're put forth to do exactly what you said, to create a moat for these legacy banks and big banks. I don't know if you've talked. I'm sure you've talked in your show about this, $600 transaction thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where, I mean, come on, the government is going to, the banks have to report to the government, to Big Brother, any transaction $600 or above. I mean, that's insane. I mean, this is like Orwellian, to say the least. I mean, it's just, the whole thing's just nuts. But you're right. You look at J.P. Morgan Chase. You look at some of these other, like, enormous banks. The amount of lobbyists and tax attorneys they have on staff, it's just mammoth. And there's this back and forth, and this is one of the dirty little secrets between Washington and Wall Street. There's this back and forth where people work for Goldman Sachs, work for JP Morgan Chase, and then when their party's in power, they go and work for Department of the Treasury or Federal Reserve or Department of Commerce. And then the next party comes in power and they go back to JP Morgan Chase or Goldman Sachs or wherever. And then it's just back and forth. And it's not like pro-Democrat or pro-Republican. It's like pro-Green Party, and not the Green Party with Jill Stein's from, the other Green Party. It's like world's smallest violin. These guys are just like doing everything they can to, enrich themselves. And it's this horrible and you know who gets screwed? Mom and dad in Dayton, Ohio. A young entrepreneur, small business woman in Youngstown, Ohio. That truck driver in Toledo, Ohio. Like, that's who's getting screwed by this. And it's got nothing to do with the strong America. It's got everything to do with them, enriching themselves. Hey, you know what I just realized also, Marty?
What's that?
I think in like whatever half hour or so we've been on, I think I'm drinking from like 4 different cups.
Yeah,
Like,
I've noticed that too. I saw coffee, a solo cup.
So I got like this one that's got like cold water, and then I got this one. I got like the red solo cup with the warm water, and then I got this one with the coffee, and then I got this one with the tea in it. I mean, is that a record for this show? Like 4 cups or
4 cups? Yes, we've in the early days of the show we used to drink a lot, so we would go through a lot of either beers or whiskey in terms of quantity, but in terms of number, different.
Maybe that'll be the 5th one.
Definitely highest in terms of number of different liquids consumed on one show. So we're gonna write that down, Car. Strike it for the record book of TFTC here. We've got at least 4 liquids being consumed on the other side of the camera. But like, coming back to what you were just saying, like with the regulatory, like, it's completely disgusting. You have Janet Yellen, like, she's done being the chairwoman of the Fed, and then she's able to go give speeches, 45-minute speeches at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, whatever it may be, and get paid $250,000 a pop or more. Sometimes Ben Bernanke, he's on the board at Citadel, which is a hedge fund that many would argue has benefited pretty massively from Fed policy, particularly after they changed the facilities in reaction to the COVID stuff in March, April 2020. They essentially opened the floodgates of the monetary spigot to hedge funds by using the FICC as proxy. Like, it is completely a corrupt system, federal bank, the Federal Reserve, and its interaction with the primary dealers that have access to the window. And so that's what Bitcoiners really lean into, as you know, is like the incentives of that system are just completely borked. Like, the way it is structured from a hierarchical design is easy to corrupt. It is, one would argue, corrupt from inception, just to how the hierarchy and the connections between the Fed and its primary dealers are set up. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin. For anybody listening, that's left, right, middle, whatever you may be, like that, I think that's one thing we can all agree on is across the aisle is the incentives of a monetary system run on Bitcoin are much more aligned with fairness and it's not going to bring about equality. It's not going to bring about a quality of outcome or equity, but the playing field is much more fair, and the incentives are much more aligned with fairness and allowing individuals to compete.
I agree wholeheartedly. One of the other gross revolving doors is between the Federal Reserve and Treasury.
Mhm. Oh
Think
yeah,
about it. I There should almost be like a wall, right? But now it's like all intertwined. From everything I've read, like they have like all these like meetings between the Fed Reserve and the Treasury, and I just
right.
think there's a lot of bad things going on there.
Yeah.
And yeah, just none of it's good for Bitcoin, and none of it's good for like the American people.
And the Fed and the Treasury have essentially merged at this point. I mean,
Right,
the
right,
Treasury has an account at the Fed now after the reaction to COVID. I mean, Janet Yellen, obviously, she was a Fed chairwoman. Now she's secretary of the Treasury Secretary. Larry Summers was similarly held both positions, I believe, or was at least a Fed governor.
yeah,
Yeah, it's very incestuous. It's filled with a bunch of individuals who don't have experience in the real world. They're academics who get to these positions, and they don't really understand what it's like for a small mom and pop shop in Ohio to run its business. They don't understand
right,
the problems that they go through, the trials and tribulations that they have. Everybody, all the mom and pop shops and even large corporations, they're just inputs in Excel sheets that these
totally.
people use as models to try to predict what will happen in the economy. And again, it goes back to the fact that these people think that they can micromanage a complex system and a monetary system. It's just not possible.
Totally, man. Not only do they not know or relate to people like in my state, but I don't think they care. Like I was at the other day, I was at a Waffle House in Octa, Ohio. It's about rural area. It's about halfway between Cincinnati and Columbus. And my waitress, her name was Teresa. I was just talking to her, and she was like, listen, like I work here 10, 12, 14 hours on my feet. And then I go to the grocery store after work, and like the price of bread, the price of milk, the price of meat, it's just getting tough, Josh. And then she was telling me, like, go to fill up my gas tank. It's getting tough. And I said to her, I said, I think inflation is theft. I said, like, this is politicians and bureaucrats and people at the Federal Reserve. They're stealing from you. This is theft. And the best antidote to that theft is Bitcoin. And, you think, Gary Gensler, Goldman Gary, you think he cares about Teresa who's working at the Waffle House in Ohio? No way. He doesn't care. And that's the problem. We just need a whole new generation of leaders in this country. And there's this lady running for Congress in LA. I think I disagree with her on every single thing. Like I can't think of one topic I agree with her on. Her name is Erica Rhodes,
Mm-hmm.
except Bitcoin. And that's one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is that it can bring people from totally opposite ends of the political spectrum together. And there's I think when the American people are looking at Washington right now, they just see a lot of politicians who care about stuffing money in their own pockets and who care about enhancing their own personal power, but don't care about the American people. And I think we just need more leaders in this country who just care about the people. And one of the things also, I think it's important to note in the 1970s, um, about 80% of public officials were veterans of the United States Armed Forces. Today, it's down to 16%, 1/6. We're at all-time low.
Mm-hmm.
And by no means does military service uniquely qualify someone for public office. But I will say that I think there's certain moments in American history when our country would be better served with more veterans, more young men and women who've carried a weapon in a foreign land, serving in the United States House and serving in the United States Senate. And I think now is one of those moments. And I think there's a lot of people in our community, in the Bitcoin community, who come from a libertarian viewpoint, and I do as well. And I think it's important that we do everything we can to recruit more military veterans into the Bitcoin community, because at the end of the day, like the Marines I served with and my buddies from the Marine Corps, they don't want the government involved in our lives. They are, and we don't talk. I don't talk politics with my buddies from the Marine Corps, and so I don't even know what political parties they are. But when a lot of them talk about sort of how they view the world, it's almost like a libertarian type viewpoint, which is I think how you and I see the world, Marty. And at the end of the day, like I was saying earlier, when we raised our right hand to defend the Constitution, to defend this flag behind me, we were we were defending the concept of human liberty, the concept of individual liberty, the concept of personal freedom, and that's what Bitcoin's all about. And so, I think as someone who's pro-American strength, pro-American military, anti-Patriot Act, and anti-big government, and pro-Bitcoin, obviously, I think we got to be doing everything we can to recruit more and more like-minded, philosophically veterans to leadership in our country, but also just get involved in the Bitcoin community because every one of them they fought to protect the ideals that Bitcoin represents.
I completely agree, and I think even to add to that, I think it probably is wise to have more military members in positions throughout politics at the federal level because they understand how scary war is, how vicious it is, and they don't take going to war lightly, which I think a lot of the politicians that sit in D.C. right now do. They don't.
It's a,
They're
you
not
know,
the ones on the.
it's a really good point you make, Marty. That I think there's a misconception. I think a lot of voters they look at someone with a military background who's running for office and they think they're going to be a warmonger and be for military adventurism in the U.S. House or the U.S. Senate. I'm the exact opposite. Like because I served and did a couple tours in Anbar Province, Iraq, as a United States Senator, I will do everything I can to keep our sons and daughters from going to war, because, I've been there and that's how most of my buddies feel too. It's just, we should do everything we can to stop war and to defend against new wars. And, what is the formula there? The formula there is a strong America. And what's foundational to a strong America? Individual liberty, personal freedom, and Bitcoin.
Yeah, I love hearing a politician say Bitcoin's essential to a strong America, as it is. I mean, you're talking to somebody who wholeheartedly believes that, and not only believes it, I've seen it to be true. I've seen it make my life better as an American. I've seen, like somebody you described with the natural gas, taking capped wells and mining Bitcoin with it. I'm doing that. Like I've seen it. Like I'm doing
You're
it.
doing that?
Yeah, like I've seen it.
Where?
Up in Tennessee.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Huh. That's
there's.
interesting. Tennessee's not a state I think of as a natural gas state, so that's awesome. What is it like in one of the shale formations or what? Where?
Yeah, I don't know the exact shale, but the way it works up there, they have very shallow oil wells that they dig. And I had a person I used to work with buy some land up there, and he happened to have a well on his land, and throwing a few miners on there to mine personally. And what we're doing is basically so the way it works up in that particular shale, northern Tennessee, southern Kentucky, is the producer would go get the oil out, again shallow well, so the oil part of the well would run dry within a few years. Wasn't economically sound to build a gas pipeline and connect it to a grid or a larger pipeline that would sell to midstream, and so oil runs dry. You cap the natural gas well that's associated with it with no pipeline connectivity, and it sits there for into perpetuity if nobody's there to come pick it up. And so we're happy to uncap the well, turn the valve, let the gas come out, flow through a generator, mine Bitcoin with it. And
Awesome, man.
reducing methane emissions, and yeah, and it's a rural farming community, so it's helping. Like we think there's a shit ton of these wells throughout this part of Tennessee. You can go to the farmers who are just paying leases on these wells that are sitting on their land and not really doing anything with the gas, and be like, hey, you could get something out of your gas. You have another revenue stream on top of what you're doing with your cattle ranching or your crop farming. Like you can get more value out of the land that you own, and this emboldens the individuals who actually run the country, the people producing our food, who have been somewhat forgotten in today's day and age. And that's the beauty of Bitcoin, being able to take these stranded, wasted energy sources, turn it into hard money, And anybody could do it. A farmer could participate in it. A large publicly traded company could take uh, part in it. Democrat, Republican, Bitcoin does not care.
Let me. Do you mind if I shift gears and talk about my race for a little?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
What's going on?
So,
It seems pretty heated from what I've
yes,
observed over the last
my
few
race for
days.
U.S. Senate is a unique opportunity for the Bitcoin community to elect a Bitcoin champion. And let me just walk through the difference between a friend and a champion in politics. A friend is someone in the United States House, United States Senate who might vote the right way for our community at the end of the day. But when the fight is going on and the senators that are in the pockets of the big banks are trying to do everything they can to screw over the Bitcoin community and block Bitcoin and stop it, a friend is not someone who's going to fight behind the scenes. They'll vote the right way at the end of the day, but they won't fight. A champion will fight. And that's what I'm going to the United States Senate to be. I'm going to the Senate to be a champion for the Bitcoin community. So when these US senators, Democrat and Republican, who are in bed with the big banks and have all this big bank money stuffed in their pockets, when they are trying to advance the cause of big banks and big government and trying to stop Bitcoin and block Bitcoin and put in horrible language like they did in the transportation bill, I will be there fighting tooth and nail alongside of Cynthia Lummis to stop them. And, in this race, there is no United States Senate race in America where there was someone like me, a Bitcoin champion, running for office. When I get to the United States Senate, I will live and breathe and sleep. I will wake up every morning fighting for the advancement of Bitcoin. And the reason I'll be doing that is because I believe in my bones in fighting for individual liberty and personal freedom. And I fought and have served, standing up for those freedoms. Now let's go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, are any of the individuals who are running against you in this GOP primary, what are their thoughts on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, most of them are silent. One of them, because they don't even understand it. Like if you started talking to them about, right to run your own node or proof of work or self custody, like they'd be lost in the sauce. Like they don't understand any of this. On top of that, I've got one lady running against me. Her name's Jane Timken. She was the chairman of the Republican Party here. She is completely in bed with these big banks. And like, if you look at the United States senators who inserted the language in the infrastructure bill that was horrible to our community, she has support from some of the same banks that are supporting them. And like, the interesting thing with this race is the voting starts in 50 days, 5-0. And so this thing's going to be over soon. And so the reason we got our teeth kicked in the infrastructure bill was because we only had one champion, Cynthia Lummis. We had some friends, but we only had one champion. And the big banks had a bunch of champion. And so we lost. And so the way to get more champions in there so this never happens again. And so instead of playing defense against Goldman Gary and the SEC and all these bad guys who are trying to stop Bitcoin and advance big banks, if we want to go on offense, we need to elect more champions. And there is no race in America, U.S. House or U.S. Senate, that has a champion like me. And I've got the scars to prove it, right? From building the first website in America to allow taxpayers to pay via taxes via Bitcoin. And I've got scars now. I mean, when I talk about ending the Federal Reserve, I get private messages say, hey, Josh, you shouldn't say that. People in the past who've said that, they've ended up in a body bag, literally. But I keep saying it because it's the right thing for our country. And so, my website is joshmandel.com, joshmandel.com. On the website, people can donate, via Bitcoin. They can also donate, via fake fiat if they want. There's a button for both of those. But listen, at the end of the day, the only way to get more champions in the U.S. Senate is to elect them. And my race is going to be over soon. And so, like, I need help. I'm up against one guy who's a banker. He put in 12 million of his own money. I'm up against this lady who's got all this big bank money and her stuff in her pockets. And here I am, the pro Bitcoin candidate. I'm actually in the lead in this race, but they're coming after me with a lot of big bank money and big government money. And I need your help, And so, anyone who can go to my website, joshmandel.com, and donate, whether it's via Bitcoin or via USD, like, I really appreciate it because like the only way to win is to be able to get this message out throughout the state. And in a state like Ohio, that's 11.7 million people, the seventh largest state in the nation, the only way to get my message out is via media, whether that's, digital media on the internet, whether that's, cable news, whether that's, streaming, via Hulu, YouTube, what have you, whether it's, traditional broadcast TV. We've got a lot of people in our state who are still watching the 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock news. And so we need to advertise via all those different mediums, but we can't do it without money. And so like I'm here as a Bitcoin champion. I want to be a Bitcoin champion in the United States Senate. I want to take on the big banks. I want to take on the SEC. I want to take on the Federal Reserve. I want to take on the Chinese Communist Party. I want to stand up for Bitcoin in the US Senate, but I can't do it if I lose. And so, I need help now to get across the finish line. And the way for people to help is post about me on their Twitter, post about me on their other social media, and most importantly, go on my website, joshmandel.com, and donate.
You heard it here first, freaks. And this is something that I think in the last year and a half specifically, Bitcoiners have realized, like, all right, we probably, like, again, said it many times throughout this conversation, I've been politically disenchanted. I said disenfranchised. I'm not really disenfranchised. I'm disenchanted by the whole process. But I have been coming around more recently. Like, all right, like you can enter the game and fight fire with fire, and by getting Bitcoin-focused politicians into positions of power, it can only help Bitcoin, I would imagine. So there's a massive push within the Bitcoin community to begin supporting politicians who are doing single issue voting or single issue with Bitcoin specifically. You mentioned Erica Rhodes. There's many Bitcoiners who've gotten behind her, and anybody out there is listening who's gotten behind Erica. I mean, why wouldn't you get behind Josh as well? And so I hope that this conversation, I know it definitely will permeate throughout the Bitcoin world. Hopefully it goes beyond though, because again, these are bipartisan issues. We need to bring sound money back and really fight for individual liberty in terms of private property rights, which Bitcoin does. And then, like you said, we talk about end the Fed and audit the Fed. Like, the Fed is in a very precarious situation. Like, we need a lifeboat. It's not going to be a CDBC or whatever, CBDC. Like the monetary system and the financial system is skating on very thin ice. Like, it would be good to have a lifeboat for when that eventually does collapse. It's going to happen. It is inevitable. It is a mathematical inevitability. And so at the federal level, if we were to shut down Bitcoin or prevent Americans from adopting Bitcoin, it would be very bad for individuals across the country. So, Josh, I want to thank you for being a champion. I really like that distinction that you made, champions versus friends, because there have been a lot of people who just mention Bitcoin because they want the votes and really won't do anything behind the scenes. So it is nice to know that there will be individuals like you standing side by side with Senator Lummis to actually champion Bitcoin on Capitol Hill, because it's desperately needed.
I appreciate it, man. And, there's over 300 million people in this country, and most of them are getting crushed now because of inflation. And I think, I just appreciate you in this conversation showing a heart and bringing up like regular people, because I think that's something that's lost in all these political discussions. Like, this isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about human beings' lives. And that's one of the main reasons I support Bitcoin, because it's good for people in my state and people in my country. And, as you know, and your listeners know, Bitcoin is deflationary, but the establishment politicians in this country that subscribe to this traditional monetary policy, they're the ones who are creating and increasing the inflation that's crushing people, just like I said earlier, moms and dads and waitresses, truck drivers, and places like Cleveland, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio. And it needs to stop. And so, like, we just got to remember when we're talking politics, we're talking policy, like, this isn't about like spreadsheets. Like, this is about people. And like, that's, I think our Bitcoin movement, if we really center it on how it impacts people's lives, we win. And let the Janet Yellens and the Powells and the Genslers and let them talk about spreadsheets and charts, and like we got to talk about people, because that's how that's how we win the argument of ideas, is talking about how you know good policy on Bitcoin and strong Bitcoin and Bitcoin champions in the United States Senate will help individual citizens throughout this great country.
Yeah, and I actually truly believe like it will solve the hyper partisanship that exists right now, because people,
Oh,
due to the rising inflation and the gorge that has been forged in the wealth inequality gap via monetary policy, people are misdiagnosing. They're saying, no, it's the left in their policies, it's the right in their policy, and nobody's pointing at the Fed and being like, this is the root of the problem. And if we fix the root of the problem, I think we should see tensions in this country from a hyper partisan perspective lessen. Because I think we'll actually, people won't have many things to complain. Well, they won't have as many things to complain about, because they'll actually be able to live their lives in a comfortable way, which just hasn't been possible in recent history because we fucked up the money.
Well said, man. Well said. And listen, when your viewers, listeners, when they go on my website, joshmandel.com, they might not agree with everything I stand for, but one thing I think they do agree with is my being a fierce pro Bitcoin champion in the U.S. Senate. And so, like I said, if we're going to be successful as a community in this political arena, we need to be relentlessly one issue and relentlessly bipartisan. And so, like, when you go to my website, just remember I am pro Bitcoin, pro Bitcoin, pro Bitcoin. And I urge you to take that into consideration and be relentlessly pro Bitcoin, which means being relentlessly one issue and supporting me because of my support and future champion of Bitcoin in the US Senate. So just, one more shameless plug for the website, joshmandel.com, joshmandel.com. You can donate there via Bitcoin and also via USD. And you can follow me on Twitter, Josh Mandel, Ohio. And listen, it's not lost on me that not everyone has money to give. And there's other ways to help. If you live in Ohio, or if you got family or friends here in Ohio, shoot them a note today and tell them you heard me, and you like what you had to say, and ask them to put a sign in their front yard. Ask them to vote for me. This isn't just about money. We do need money to win this thing, but we need a lot more. We need votes, and we need volunteers, and people can help out in a variety of ways.
Freaks, if you want to help the cause, if you want to get Bitcoin, a Bitcoin champion on Capitol Hill, joshmandel.com. We'll link to it in the show notes as well. Josh, I wish you well. Thank you for fighting the good fight on behalf of liberty in the digital age.
Thanks, man. Next time, let's do the show in Ohio. Let's get you up here.
Yeah, no, I'd love to come up
there. Jeep with me. Get you on the road.
Yeah, I need to come check out that Gucci gas, so I'll definitely be up in the state.
I tell you what, man, no joke. Like I know a lot of people here who are active in the Utica and the Marcellus. That'd be an interesting show for you to do, to come up here. And, people don't realize, the abundance of natural gas up here in poor parts of Ohio, Eastern Ohio, Western PA, and West Virginia. And it'd be interesting to come up here and do a show and talk to some of those folks, because so much of that natural gas is not only contributing to the economic strength of America, but it can be contributing to Bitcoin mining as well.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's a bit contrarian to the Bitcoin world right now, but I believe off-grid natural gas mining is going to contribute significant hash rate to the network by the end of the end of the decade here. I'll definitely be making a trip up, because and I love the producers that I've spoken with in Ohio. It's good people. I'm from Pennsylvania personally, so just a state east of you, and it's like I'm from Philadelphia, but everywhere west of Philadelphia, it's just like good, hardworking people who just want to put food on their families' tables, put a roof over their heads, and just live a good life.
Yeah, you know what they say about Pennsylvania, right? You got Philadelphia on one side, Pittsburgh on the other, and Alabama in between.
Yeah, it's an incredible state. It's a big state. They're big states. Good football states too. The Ohio-Pennsylvania football rivalry is a good one.
I mean, I'm not sure I'd compare Pennsylvania football to that's another conversation.
Yeah, it's a conversation for another day. Josh, thank you again. Wish you well. And that's all we got this week, freaks. Peace and love.